Hey guys, what's up? Omni here. Today we're going to implement the system of mind that causes enemies to change shape and size randomly and constantly, changing games into certified acid trips. That's right, the Abomnification system. It's always the last of the big three game neutral systems that I implement prior to calling a game Omnified. I say that like that's been going on for a while. I only just invented the Abomnification system maybe 3 games or so during Omnifying Monster Hunter World. It can be the most difficult system to implement, depending on the game. If you have no idea what the Abomnification system is, and you want to learn more about it, I'll have a general overview video for it linked below in the description soon, trademark. If you don't know what Omnified means, I do have a general overview video for that. Link is in the description. As you may know, or not know, the Abomnification system consists of the random generation of morphing target dimensional scales. That's for height, width, and depth. It requires a game to have a built-in scaling parameter for creatures. Many, even most maybe, games do. However, if the game does not have built-in scaling functionality, we have to implement that ourselves. And that is definitely some advanced level reverse engineering, both in the code finding and the code writing, especially the code writing, and especially the code finding. Dark Souls 2 is one of those games. One of those games that doesn't have a scaling parameter. You tend to see that in games that have custom engines. Seems like the FromSoft games do. I actually already have the system implemented, but what I'm going to be going over today is the process I underwent in order to find where the code is to hook into. And I actually already have the system implemented. What I'm going to go over today is the process I underwent in order to find where to hook the code into to change the shapes of creatures. Finding such a place is not easy. Especially when there's no built-in scaling parameter. We have to build it ourselves. And the place we need to hook into is typically going to be something that deals with the drawing of the 3D shapes that we see in the game before us. Let me show you how I did that. Before I got to the result, there were some definitely very interesting creations that I ended up making. You'll see what I mean in just a little bit. So to find a good place to manipulate the player's shape, I first thought it prudent to find code that had an effect on the player's height. So that means I had to find a numeric approximation as to what the player's height might be. So to do that, I did the same very unscientific way I did it for Dark Souls 1, using my stair method. I basically walked up to the stairs here and found a place where my head reached the top of the stairs. So right here, it's convenient because it's basically where my head goes to, although it's a little bit above, but still gives me an idea. Standing right here, I then recorded my current Y coordinate. I then would go and stand in the place my head was lined up to, or as near as I could as possible, and then I recorded the Y coordinate while standing there. Taking the difference of these two coordinates should give me an approximate height, since Y determines where you are vertically. I then took that value, let's say it was 1.4, and I searched a range around that value, since my measurement, of course, was not exact. Let's say I measured 1.5, I believe, which is what I did measure, maybe 1.5 to 1.6. I would take a range of 1.4 and 1.6 or 7. And I would do a search for all the floats in the game's memory that fell between these two. And I got something roughly around what this is here, 91,000. Tens of thousands, of course. So I definitely needed to filter it down a bit. The values that we have here are all things that might be the height, or at least something related to it. So to narrow it down though, we would need to effectuate some changes in the height. And I effectuated some changes in the height by doing some attacking moves. As you notice, the head will dip a bit while I'm in the middle of that swing, and it goes back up. I had hotkeys bound to various key combinations for the decrease value and increase value scan options in Cheat Engine, here and here. And when my head would dip down, I'd hit the hotkey for decrease value. When it went back up, I'd hit the hotkey for increase value. And this would narrow down the list of results quite a bit. I would end up finally with several hundred, maybe 1,000 values related to height. I then looked for addresses that were in a region of memory that I knew was where player data for this character occupied. Among the addresses that were remaining, I would then narrow down the search to regions of memory that I knew data related to my character was in. Since I already mapped the player's own control structure, which is what the game calls the root data struct for character information, I knew what regions of memory the data was in. Here's that player control struct. It's the root of all the information related to my character. In particular, I looked for places that were nearby the player's physics module, which is where a lot of this shape and size stuff tends to be. This member right here at offset 100 hex, the character physics control. So narrowing it down to that range in memory, that would give me around 100 values or so to work with. And so I would then look and see what code was writing to these values. And a lot of those values were being written to by the same bit of code. This code right here is what I stumbled on first, writing to these height-related values. And what is this code here? Well, you're gonna see is I wrote a bunch of test hooks to manipulate it. We see a whole bunch of calculations going on here with these SSE registers. The results of these calculations were then stored in 16-byte segments, starting at RCX, or wherever that pointed to, and then an additional 16 bytes stored in RCX plus 10 and RCX plus 20. Something that looked very familiar to me from the first game I created my own scaling parameter functionality in, which was Sekiro, and also similar to drawing code that we found in Dark Souls 1. In those games, the first 16 bytes was everything related to one of the scaling dimensions. Let's say it was height with one of those. Next 16 bytes was data related to the next dimension, then the final 16 bytes was related to the last dimension. All of them were parts of matrices that were being drawn, basically. In Dark Souls 1, or was it Sekiro, it was using the scale form library to do that. So when I found this code, I was like, hey, I found the place where it's drawing the various 3D vertices or whatnot, processing those matrices, and making beautiful graphics. You know, it wasn't quite that. I created some hooks into the code to manipulate some of these. First, this code is done in multiple passes for a particular object, let's say. And we can call those rendering passes. And the rendering pass is indicated by the register RDI. And basically, as I found out eventually, any change I would make to the calculated values would bubble up, which caused very interesting things to happen. So I wrote some hooks that basically made some changes to the values that were about to be written into that RCX register address location for a particular pass, and just that pass. So let's examine what happens then. So the first place I hooked into was this first right here, the RCX. And I thought it was gonna be, you know, just a dimension, right? As you can see here, this is us multiplying the values that are gonna be stored in that first right, that RCX register, by 1.5. And the character's height increased. Ooh, looks like maybe I found a place that I can manipulate the dimensions of the character in. However, that's not entirely true. What this code actually does is it arranges parts of the character's body. I don't have a degree in game development. I got a degree in computer engineering, but I'm not an expert with game development and all that. I haven't done any of that. So it's probably a better term for this kind of stuff here, but I think I am correct. As you can see, when we manipulate the second sequence of 16 bytes, we get this beautiful thing here. That's right. This is that RCX plus 10 right. Rendering pass is 3, I think. And magnitude is 1.5 only. We can change the rendering pass. See different things happen. It's basically skipping some of the parts of the body. And the values that we're multiplying, some of them have to do with size, but also some of them have to do with position. And it makes sense because we found this code not actually by changing the height of the character per se. You know, and that's what we did for Dark Souls 1. I did those attacking animations and then I looked for decreases. But what actually happened was the character's parts shifted. When I did that swing attack with my weapon, you know, my head would duck down. The arrangement of my head from the rest of my body changed, and that makes sense. But this code was vital to finding the actual place to do the scaling parameter implementation in. You'll see that in a sec, how that is. But I'm not gonna throw these away anyway, even after the video's done, because there's some interesting things you can do with it. If we get to, I think 6 or so, notice this skips most of the parts except for the head. And that's right, my friends, we have big head mode. Let's make the head even bigger. Look at that, big head mode. Whee! Probably could skip multiplying some of those other floats that are in that SSC register that's being written RCX plus 10, and that would probably correct the tilt, but that's funny too. I think we'll definitely have a big head mode in the Omnified Dark Souls 2. And then the RCX was 20, the third sequence of 16 bytes. Seems just to affect what this arm is. I'm not sure. But here's the one, the primary parts arrangement function is what I called it. This code right here, that first write, that was what I was most interested in, because I thought I found a place where if I multiply the values by 2 or whatever, it'll increase my character's height by 2, and then we can also do the same for the other dimensions. But that's not the case here. This is vertical placement of the parts. It's not size of the parts, or at least not necessarily, or at least not in a straightforward way, not in a way we want. If we change the rendering paths here, you get some strange things. My character is now floating in the air. That's only if we do it to rendering pass 2. Here we have a very tiny man with his hands in front of his face and his hair floating. Here we apparently only have one leg. Big leg, little leg. Big leg, little leg. Big leg, medium leg? Tall neck man. Tall neck man, but it's only his neck, not his clothing. There's many different passes. It's very interesting. And a bit of interesting code that I'll be definitely keeping around. But when I try to, make the width get bigger, when I try to make the depth get bigger, I realize it's not an actual place where I can affect the drawing size of a creature. It's this parts arrangement thing that I'm terming it. So I was in despair. Oh no, I thought I found the scaling function, but I didn't give up hope. In fact, this was necessary for me to find the actual place that I would want to hook into, and that's because of this very simple reason. By manipulating the calculated values in the parts arrangement, I was essentially changing the character's height. And so I could turn it off and search for those original values again, and then increase or decrease the magnitude of the multiplier I'm applying to the parts arrangement, like so. And then I could search for increases in height. I had full control over it now, and it didn't have to do with game functions that resulted in change into placement. This is actually true comparison of changes in actual drawing height, and so this was very necessary in order to find it. And it's probably a technique I'll use again in the future. And that led me to some values again that I looked at what code was manipulating those values, and that led me to the actual drawing code for the 3D graphics models of the game, which was right here. The tail end of this function here, where, as you can see, it's doing something that looks a little similar. It's doing 16 bytes and another 16 and another 16. Matrix data. Probably 4x4 matrix data? 3x4? I don't know. I'm not a game expert. I just hack them. I'm learning. And so here indeed is an area in code where I can increase the height, width, and depth of the character. I determined that the first 16 bytes was indeed the width, the second was the depth, and the last was the height. And we have 3 sample hooks in here the initial bits of code that I wrote to multiply those values going into these addresses. And this is what we get. For the depth, this is multiplied by 2 or so. And then the height. I don't remember what the multiplier was. As you can see, as things start to get scaled out, they start to become further and further apart. They start to become a bit disjointed. That's because this is done in many different rendering passes as well. And this is the width. Don't be worried though. The actual Abomnification code makes the morphing smooth, baby. And so that's where we put in our the first part, the often optional part of the Abomnification system, the scale changer. The other part of the Abomnification system is the actual code that randomly generates the morphing scaling targets for the creatures. And in games that have a scaling functionality built into it already, it's the only thing I have to write. And the scaling generation stuff is game neutral. I just copy paste it in between games. I'm gonna work it into my common included library soon of hacks. But basically, for that one, I just look for a place in code that's pulling the coordinates of all creatures. Usually there's one that's just pulling the coordinates of creatures, NPCs, and I hook into that one. I tend to keep it separate from my other coordinate related hooks. And then we store our morph index, scaling morph index in an area of memory close to what's being accessed here that I know is safe to store it in. Just need 4 bytes of safe data to write to in the enemy, or creature, or player, or NPC. And as I went over in my previous Abomnification video, we maintain a data bank, a separate memory bank isolated from the game of the randomly generated values. And that's identically the same between games, this code here. So you can just refer to the general overview video of the Abomnification system to see how this works here, the scaling random generation code. The only thing that changes between games is simply where I write that 4 bytes parameter. The actual scaling modification code, which is what this earlier part of the video went into detail and showing how I found, that's usually in an area code that's very messy, as in the rendering data that you're given in the form of arguments, like structs that are being pointed to by the various registers that are loaded when the function's being called. And that data is almost polymorphic in nature. For Dark Souls 2, I have to handle at least 10 different types of data. And that's quite tricky in assembly because you have to be able to then essentially type check or the game crashes. And luckily for you, if it's not up already, I will be putting up a video on how to do advanced polymorphic data handling in assembly, how to write code or insert hooks into code that has to deal with a non-uniform as far as the type identity goes, at least, of the data that you have to process in that hook. And so I wrote quite a bit of code here that I still need to clean up that processes all the various different types of data that comes in, make sure that they're valid pointers, etc. Lots of code here. Lots of code. And then we essentially just load those randomly generated morphing targets, scaling values, and I just multiply the calculated values by that. And we have the Abomnified Dark Souls II experience. I'm very quite happy that I figured out how to handle all these different types of data, and now, unlike maybe some previous Omnified games where I did this, I think notably Sekiro, we now handle the morphing of clothing, most clothing types, not 100%, but 99%. Maybe we'll get to 100% during gameplay. But to learn more about the code of the Abomnification system, make sure to check out the general overview of my game neutral Abomnification system, and I'll have a link to that video in the description. All right, everyone, let's observe the Abomnification system at work in Dark Souls 2. As we peer around the corner here, we'll begin to see the strangely morphing abominations that enemies have become. You can see these enemies here at the start are both changing shape and size randomly. They appear to both be non-uniformly morphing. Most of their clothing is morphing with them. That's all handled with separate data. Quite happy to see it all morphing. Look at these abominations. Look at them approach. Ah! The man with the floating shoulder pads. I don't care if we don't get all the pieces of clothing. This is where you get most of them. And that probably is just indicative of a particular type of data that isn't being supported right now. But you can see that's the Abomnification system. Full random range of depths, heights, and widths. Look at him as he grows taller and then shorter. There we go. With Dark Souls II Omnified, we have full omnification of Dark Souls 2. We'll do some additional hacks, but they'll be game specific from here on out, and we'll do them on stream. And if I don't do them on stream, I'll put them on the YouTube as well. You can see the troll in the distance morphing. Horrific. Terrifying. Full-blown acid trip. If you guys like the content, appreciate this sort of different approach to the gaming and I guess game development, please give the video a like and please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to have any questions about what I'm doing here, feel free to comment. Also join my Discord server, where we all hang out. Links in the description. And remember, the only place to catch this Omnified action live is on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/omni. Thank you guys. Good day.